Is this the worst recruiting class in James Franklin's tenure? I'm not going to go that far, but there are people that are concerned that this group is going to fall outside of the top 20.
You are Locked On Nittany Lions, your daily podcast on the Penn State Nittany Lions. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
We're going to answer some of the tough questions in this one. You are locked on to Penn State football recruiting. And as always, thank you so much for making Locked On Nittany Lions your first listen and watch every single day, your daily source for all things Penn State sports. My name is Seyko, and I am your host of the show, credentialed media member for both Penn State football and Penn State wrestling. We were talking about the 2026 class, where it stands, but more importantly, having a debate around it. What went wrong with the class of 2026, and could it actually fall outside of the top 20? Is this just a short-term issue, or is this a sign of things to come for Penn State football recruiting? And how do you fix any of the issues that Penn State experienced in this cycle before you get to signing day in December? Friendly reminder, let me know your thoughts down in the comments section. And a big thank you to the everydayers out there for making us a part of your regular routine. Let's talk about this 2026 class. What went wrong here? Well, there was plenty that did go wrong because this cycle was a disappointment. But to go that much further and say this is the worst of James, or even to think it, was this James Franklin's worst cycle of his tenure? No, it's not. Both subjectively and objectively, if you go back through the rankings, look at the industry, look at 24/7, because On3 wasn't around back then when James Franklin took over and started recruiting in 2014. And those classes, yeah, we see the tangible results from some of them, but even still, there were some recruiting classes that are not going, that do not have that same kind of credibility that even 2026 has. I think why most people might overreact to this and say, if you are overreacting to this, and say that this 2026 class is not that good, it's not as good as it could have been. That's a fair statement to say, because they missed out on almost every single priority target. It's also the way that they were missed out on, because if we say every priority target, well, that's not true. They got Kevin Brown. Kevin Brown might be one of the top 10 offensive line prospects, period, whether tackle or guard, interior offensive lineman or offensive tackle in this entire recruiting class once the rankings finally catch up. Messiah Mickens, Notre Dame was pushing for him. J1 Sider was not going to let that one go. And Penn State, at least the way things seem, they were able to fend him off, Notre Dame off in this battle. Somebody like Jackson Ford. Jackson Ford was sought after by Ohio State, Michigan, Wisconsin, pretty much every Big Ten foe that you could think of. And Penn State, even though that's an in-state prospect, that wasn't an easy recruiting battle. So it's the way that Penn State went on these cold streaks, losing 4 prospects in a row to Notre Dame. And it's not just Joey O'Brien, Kari Adams, Grayson McHugh, another prospect that does get overlooked in this. Charlie Tom, who was a rising offensive tackle prospect, and will certainly see a ranking boost in due time, I imagine. So the priority targets that they missed on because of how it happened, why it happened, Notre Dame, Michigan, 4 back-to-back prospects in 2 instances. But it's the way that Penn State also handles recruiting, because they do try to get a majority of this class taken care of before the season. They have 25 prospects committed. That's nothing to bat an eye at. Some schools don't even have 10. They don't even have double digits in this 2026 cycle. So it is a massive overreaction to say that this cycle was bad, or it's horrendous, horrific, whatever negative adjective you want to use for it. It is still a good class. I think it's par for the course, because when I was going back and looking, okay, how did this go in 2018, 2017, kind of as James Franklin got into the middle of his tenure at Penn State, and top 15 finish, just outside of the top 15. That was pretty routine. So right now where Penn State stands, just inside the top 15 per on three in the team rankings is par for the course. It really is. And why it didn't go as well as it did has to do with some other extracurricular reasons, ulterior reasons. There's a stadium renovation. Penn State retained a majority of its core from last season. NIL covers a bunch of different things, and donors that are committed to the stadium renovation that helped bring Drew Aller back, Katron Allen, Nicholas Singleton. I go through this list practically daily at this point in time when I think about it. But it's important to rehash because you are paying players, veteran players, probably over $1 million, maybe $2 million. In the case of Drew Aller, his NIL valuation is almost $3.5 million. He might be getting more than that. He very well could. I don't know that directly, but I would definitely bank on it that Aller is making probably over $3 million if that's what On3's estimating him at. But so between NIL issues or where NIL is being utilized, donors are putting their money towards roster retention because I don't blame Penn State's donations. I don't blame people for wanting to donate to keep players that are committed to the program. You commit your financial investments to them as opposed to a prospect that you don't know if they're going to stay for 3, 4, or 4 years. You don't know at the end of the day. Drew Aller's been here. Nicholas Singleton and Katron Allen have been here. Dennis Sutton has been here. Zach Hugh Wheatley. Again, I could go on. And Penn State playing a little bit of free agency in the transfer portal. Kyron Hudson, Trevor Pena in the later part. That's very uncharacteristic for Penn State to go and get a high priority need or a player that they feel is a need. They wanted a wide receiver. They got a wide receiver. They needed a linebacker because they lost one. They went and got a linebacker and got the best player available. That took NIL. So it's a combination of all those factors, but I can understand that it's going to look like Penn State is having a bad cycle. Let me finish up this segment by making a prediction. I don't think this class falls outside of the top 20. There are 25 commitments at this present time. There could be more. They could have a flip. There might be a prospect that has a really strong senior season or a start to one. And Penn State, because there are still available uncommitted players that could commit to Penn State that we don't know about, that are under the radar at this present moment. Penn State's not finished recruiting. I do think we could see one target or two potentially flip to Penn State, and maybe they add somebody else later in the cycle that we're not even remotely talking about because we just don't know. This class still checked a lot of boxes for Penn State. They do have a potential 5-star player in Kevin Brown. I know he's a 5-star, even though the rankings don't say it yet. They don't say it yet. They got their quarterback. They got 3 wide receivers. They got one of the top in-state players in Messiah Mickens, who is also, give or take, a top 10, top 15 running back in the nation. 4 defensive linemen, 3 linebackers, 5 offensive linemen, 6 defensive backs. There's a lot of players that are underrated that are already committed. The rankings are off. They're not completely accurate at this point in time. As these players get into their senior seasons, Penn State's class will begin to solidify a little more, and those players that are underrated will help boost Penn State in the team standings as well. They very well could finish inside the top 15. That's my expectation, 15th, 16th, but again, it's par for the course. Now, is this a short-term issue? Is Penn State going, whether it's NIL related or Penn State's just not as strong, James Franklin's just not as strong of a recruiter? But now Marcus Freeman and Notre Dame, right? Sharon Moore in Michigan. But there's already evidence that this isn't a long-term issue. We're going to talk about why that is coming up next here on Locked On Nittany Lions. And this episode is brought to you by Gametime. You get to download the Gametime app because buying tickets to your favorite events should not be stressful. Have you ever decided at the last minute to head to a ball game with friends or family? Maybe it's game day and you suddenly realize that you want to be in the stands. That's exactly where Gametime comes in. It's the easiest way to grab last minute tickets without the stress. With the money you save on tickets, now you can spend that on food, drinks, merchandise, or even invite a bigger group of friends to come along with you. Gametime makes all of that possible. Gametime makes buying tickets fast and simple, and not just to only sporting events, concerts, comedy, theater, you name it. And prices on the app will actually drop closer as you get closer to first pitch, the start of the concert. They've got incredible last minute deals, clear seat views, and the lowest price guarantee that takes the worry out of buying. And right now, you can even get tickets for Penn State football games via Gametime. And if you haven't been to Beaver Stadium, those seat views ahead of time, I do believe are a game changer when I've used Gametime myself. If I've never been to a stadium or a venue, to not have to second guess that point of view at a new venue truly does come in handy. Take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Gametime. Download the Gametime app, create an account, redeem code LOCKEDONCollege for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create that account. Redeem code LOCKEDONCOLLEG, Locked On College for $20 off. Download the Gametime app today. Last minute tickets, lowest price guaranteed. Is this a one-time thing? Or is this a long-term issue where Penn State's just going to continue to get pushed around? It's Notre Dame and Michigan this time around, but then maybe it's USC, maybe it's Oregon a little more routinely, Ohio State. We just haven't seen a lot of the Buckeyes this time in too many head-to-head battles with Penn State. The evidence is there that Penn State's not going to have this kind of issue every single cycle. I mean, you look at 2027. It's right there. I know 2027 so far away. Players could flip, decommit. I know all of those. You have to preface everything right because you don't know, especially in the age of NIL. And it's not specifically the transfer portal, but just that there's so much movement in college football on a day-to-day basis, it feels like. But Penn State already has commitments from a top 10 prospect in the nation, Keemon Spell, number 1 running back per on 3. Top 30, well, give or take. Industry says top 50. On 3 says top 20 in the nation. One of the best wide receivers in the country. We can say that objectively. Khalil Taylor, who just shut down his recruitment, who verbally went publicly, said that he is shutting down his recruitment, meaning he's not taking any more visits to other schools other than Penn State. Leighton Von Brandt, another player per the industry, is give or take top 50. I think he's just outside of the top 50. One of the best offensive line prospects in the class of 2027. All 3 of them are already committed to the class of 2027. So you have the best running back in the country, a top 3 wide receiver, give or take, in the entire country, and a top 10 offensive line prospect, 3 top 50 prospects, conservatively speaking. And this is just the beginning of the next cycle, the future cycle. Penn State's already been rivals and on 3 merged, but future casted. There's a crystal ball, 24/7 particularly. Peter Bork, top 10 quarterback in the class of 2027, has been projected to Penn State. So if Penn State has all these recruiting issues, why are they getting the number 1 running back already? A top 3 wide receiver when they have all these wide receiver problems and the conversation that Marcus Hagan shouldn't even have a job at Penn State, but Khalil Taylor is already in the fold. Offensive line recruiting, Phil Troutwine's just great at that. He's just really good at that. And then you're linked to a top 10 quarterback. You have a projection to land his commitment. Seems a little early, but that's how recruiting is, but those predictions don't happen on accident. So this is just, I think, relative to 2026. Between the stadium renovations, between retaining a roster, making some additions in the transfer portal, recruiting has just been down the list. It's not as high of a priority So that's why I don't think it was completely off to say that, Penn State, it is an odd way of framing it to say that they somewhat tanked the 2026 class, but it might be worth it if you end up winning a national title. It's definitely worth it. But that's the big if you win the national title. It's not an if you actually do win the title, because then, okay, in the scheme of things, then yeah, 2026, the recruiting class for 2026 doesn't matter. But 2027 is off to a phenomenal start, and you're going to have NIL. You're going to free up some NIL resources when Drew Aller does move on. Singleton, Allen, again, do you want me to go through the list? Because I can. So this isn't a sign of things to come. This isn't going to be a routine instance in recruiting for Penn State. It's just right now. It's just relative to 2026. Could this happen again in theory? Maybe. But then stadium renovations are not going to be an issue. And then donors will have some more money that they'll be willing to donate or have freed up to go to recruiting or maybe in the transfer portal. Again, it also goes back to that Penn State's not going to routinely have top 5 recruiting classes. And that is because Penn State's NIL is handled with that idea of success with honor in mind, that donors would rather show their support to the veteran players that have been around for a while, as opposed to high school prospects that just haven't done anything for Penn State. That's just an objective reason. I don't blame them for making that decision and wanting it to be that way. It is their money after all. But that's how Penn State's going to operate. They're not going to just hand out NIL deals to any prospect. And if it's truly, and this was something that's just been said on social media by other people that I talk to, that if it's about the money, I think recruiting coordinators for Penn State, but I don't know who to directly quote. But if you're in it for the money, you're probably not going to end up at Penn State. If it's just about how much NIL money you're going to get, then you're not going to be a Nittany Lion. So with that in mind, Penn State, I think, is going to have these instances where, yeah, you might take a hit on the recruiting trail periodically if there's a bulk of the veteran roster that you need to retain so that you can make another push for a national championship. And I think that's the right way to do it. It's the right way to do it even when you are committed. At the end of the day, you don't know if you're actually going to be committed long-term to any school. This isn't just about Penn State. This is anywhere. How often are you going to spend 4 years at an institution? Hopefully that changes with the House settlement, but at this point in time, it's still up in the air how that's going to all change over time. But what can Penn State do going forward for 2026? Because they checked a lot of boxes, but there's still some that still need to be addressed. Let's answer that coming up next here on Locked On Nittany Lions. What are Penn State's plans? What are their needs? What do they need to do to improve the 2026 cycle? They have 25 commitments. Again, there are some Nebraska. I don't even know that Nebraska has 8 commitments in this cycle. Now, those are 2 different programs that are they're on 2 different paths. At this point in time, recruiting's pretty much handled here. Now, there are going to be scholarships available. The Nittany Lions, James Franklin, see a prospect that emerges, or somebody, I named a few of them in a recent episode. I encourage people to go check them out. I gave a lengthy list of prospects that would be considered flip targets now for Penn State. Yes, Joey O'Brien, Kari Adams, Grayson McHugh. I'm not here to say whether or not that would happen, but Penn State's still going to try to recruit them. They're still going to try to flip them. But some realistic options, because it is Rutgers. Elias Koch is a talented wide receiver. Rutgers did out-recruit Penn State, probably because they could promise him a little more early playing time. But in the scheme of things, if Penn State really wants to push for him, they can try, and he's from the state of Pennsylvania. Same thing with Tavian Branch. defensive tackle prospect. I caught up and went back and watched his high school film. He's a good prospect. I would very much like Penn State to add him as a defensive tackle prospect if they happen to be able to make that flip. But there isn't this long list, since Penn State has 25 commitments as opposed to 10 or 15 even, or even 20. There's really not much more that you're going to do to expand this class. I would have loved Penn State to have 2 quarterbacks in this cycle since Peyton Falzone flipped. And that really, I can confidently say that had to do with NIL. Auburn made a phone call. It was because he didn't go and visit. He didn't hold a scholarship from them for very long and just magically flipped just like that. Nobody knew a thing. Penn State insiders, Auburn insiders, none of us knew. And it just happened. That screams to me NIL. But they still have a quarterback prospect. So they don't need to necessarily try and flip somebody. And that's going to be difficult convincing someone to be a second quarterback in this class. Transfer portal is always there. You can go get a quarterback out of the transfer portal, but you also take the chance that one that doesn't necessarily fit your system is going to enter the portal at that given time in the future. You can't predict that. 5 offensive linemen. Running back room's pretty stacked. I know that I've seen comments about Brian Bonner and Penn State should push for him. They don't need to. It's a great player, talented player. But because Penn State's stacked at running back, even losing Nicholas Singleton and Katron Allen, they are more than just fine at the running back spot. If I had to say what priorities are remaining for Penn State, try and get a 4th wide receiver. Can't hurt. If somebody has a great start to their senior year, if there's somebody that you can flip, go get a 4th wide receiver. I think that would be helpful because you are losing 3 starters after this season. You're losing Trevor Pena. You're losing Kyron Hudson, Devontae Ross. You're going to have a lot of turnover there for pass catchers. You got a tight end. You didn't need a tight end in this class. You still got one. If there is a headline type of prospect that happens to decommit, or there's an opportunity to flip them, by all means, go for it. I would say wide receiver and defensive tackle are the biggest remaining priorities. It just helps the cause at that point in time. Carter Gooden is still out there at this point, just to overall, whether he's a strong side defensive end or a defensive tackle, he's still a really talented, high upside defensive line prospect. Get him, and then that takes care of, okay, then you don't necessarily have to push for a Tavian Branch because then you do have 5 defensive linemen. Wide receiver, defensive tackle, you're good at defensive back. Unless you think you can flip a superstar type of player, a Dorian Barney or a Kari Adams. Like I said, I do think that is a little unrealistic. There's not a lot of needs remaining because Penn State checked all of the boxes. They have a filled out class for 2026. They're not missing any positions of need. They could add people to bolster it, but it's not, man, I can't believe they didn't do that. No, it's okay if they don't, but it'd be a good thing if they do. So that's what's left for Penn State in reality. And we'll see how it all unfolds in the middle of the season. Penn State gets off to a hot start. They very well could have more flips than we're expecting at this point in time. And we'll see. Recruiting's fun because you never know what's going to happen. You never know what curveball is going to be thrown out there. That is going to do it for this edition of Locked On Nittany Lions. Thank you so much for checking out this episode. Friendly reminder to let me know your thoughts down in the comments section. Thank you to the everydayers for making us a part of your regular routine. If you're not an everydayer, become one. Subscribe to the YouTube channel and wherever you get your podcasts for the latest conversations around your favorite Penn State sports teams.